Obrigado por acompanhar a gente aí, né? A gente está com essa trilha de webinars aí, e o objetivo é sempre agregar para o mercado brasileiro, trazendo tecnologia, inovação e, antes de tudo, resolvendo o problema, né? Bom, o que vamos falar hoje? Hoje vamos falar da parte de gestão de roles. É um assunto bem específico dentro da disciplina de IGA. A gente tem vários amigos aí que são fãs desse assunto, e hoje vamos fazer um deep dive sobre esse assunto. Queria agradecer a presença do Benedite aqui da Nexis. A Nexis é um importante parceiro nosso, é tecnologia alemã, então qualidade extrema no que faz, e vamos surfar essa onda juntos aqui no Brasil e na América Latina agora com a SEK. Meu nome é André, eu sou o presidente da NetBR by SEK, e obrigado por todos estarem aqui. Então, vamos lá. Bom, esse conceito de role management, até uma coisa bacana, a gente da NetBR aí, há cerca de uns 5 anos, iniciamos uma jornada de desenvolvimento do que a gente chama de plugins, de módulos, para resolver essa questão de ciclo de vida de RBAC no mercado, e a gente viu que, de fato, esse é um assunto bem complexo, e quanto mais especializada a solução, melhor para atender os requisitos. Não é um assunto novo, assim como a gente investiu nessa tecnologia alguns anos atrás, com os plugins do SailPoint IIQ, é um assunto já que vem de uma longa data. Esses termos são antigos, para falar a verdade, eu fiz uma pesquisa rápida aqui na internet, são termos de há mais de 50 anos que existem, né? E nos últimos 30 anos, principalmente, é o que vem sido mais adotado em função de adoção de plataformas de ERP, nesse contexto de RBAC e perfil. Mas é algo que vem evoluindo numa velocidade até exponencial, movidos até pelos novos pilares da gestão de identidade, né? Que são drivers que a gente tem no mercado hoje em dia. Primeira coisa que eu queria pontuar, gestão de role, tá? Não é gestão de governança e nem gestão de identidade. É um pouco diferente. Esse conceito ele é muito importante, porque o mercado ele foca muito a pessoa dentro de um ciclo de vida dela, de uma governança, e aí a gente tem a palavrinha mágica do IGA, né, que é o JML, que é o Join, Move and Leave, que é basicamente criar e remover usuários, né, fazer o CRUD dele, além de certificar e toda a parte de auditoria. Mas tem um outro pedaço desse Lego, e na verdade é um grande Lego, gestão de identidade, que é como organizar os acessos. Não é como criar os acessos de uma identidade, é como organizar os acessos. E aí que entra o gap de role management e a nossa parceria aqui com a Nexis para resolver esse problema. Porque role é uma abstração de agrupamentos lógicos de permissão, de permissionamento, né? De uma forma bem básica para explicar para vocês. E aí a gente tem um conceito um pouco de grupos, o conceito de entitlement, que é uma abstração maior, que é quando que eu associo uma identidade a uma role, né? De uma forma bem básica, assim. Mas essa problemática dessa parte de gestão do lado direito do slide, ele é um gap no mercado. Normalmente, a gente tem iniciativas de serviço que elas também nunca terminam, né? Porque enquanto você está terminando de fazer um mapeamento, já as coisas mudam, as hierarquias mudam, as regras mudam. Então, é um gap. Quais são esses gaps da parte de role management? No IGA, a gente tem bem definido os objetivos de um projeto de IGA. No role, na parte de role entitlement group, é algo que ficou parado no mercado. Então, a gente tem, da forma que ele é gerida, muito manual, com planilha Excel, com uso de e-mail, sem processo de certificação, sem auditoria desse processo como um todo. Então, existem gaps que a gente precisa cobrir de forma imediata. Por quê? Porque os principais até vetores de invasão de identidade não é só um usuário estar ativo ou não estar ativo. É um usuário estar ativo ou não estar ativo e ter acesso a um determinado grupo, a um determinado entitlement, a um determinado perfil, a uma determinada role. É o casamento dessas coisas. Não dá para mitigar o risco da parte de gestão de identidade sem esse controle de roles, né? O que a gente fala aqui, a higienização do acesso em si é crítico para a higienização do risco. Não é só um usuário estar ativo ou não estar ativo, existir ou não existir. E aí, abstração de roles, né? Abstração de roles e entitlements e grupos não é simples também, é algo complexo, né? E também precisa ser gerido. Então, não é só a role em si, mas é a abstração dela. É o que a gente fala, né? Do ciclo de vida da role. E aí, quando a gente trabalha na parte de credencial, a palavra credencial nada mais é que um conjunto de atributos de uma determinada identidade. Quando a gente fala de uma credencial da identidade, a gente fala também dos atributos das roles e os atributos dos entitlements. E aí você começa a ver a complexidade de fazer a gestão sobre isso daí. E o grande desafio das empresas é essa associação. E fazer isso de forma manual é praticamente impossível. Se a gente tem um escopo de empregados, ou mesmo de roles ou entitlements mais enxutos, é mais fácil gerir. Se eu tenho uma lista grande dessas pessoas, é mais complexo gerir isso. E aí, a gente, né, no mercado, a gente somos ótimos para criar jargão e criamos o jargão do Role Explosion. O Role Explosion é exatamente a falta de controle dessas abstrações. E aí, cada vez mais criação de grupos para associar um acesso de uma identidade a um determinado perfil, uma determinada função. Mas só para vocês entenderem a complexidade de fazer isso de forma manual. E aí a gente entra com essa abordagem, o Benedito vai se apresentar e a gente termina aqui, depois da minha introdução aqui, com uma demo para mostrar como que a gente resolve esse problema. Mas, de fato, o desafio é cuidar e governar do ciclo de vida das roles, né? Desde a detecção, criação, aprovação, assim como isso existe para a identidade, né, em si, isso existe para role. E aí, uma abstração de modelagem desse ciclo de vida, né? Isso aqui é só mais uma visão para entendimento do conceito. Então, até uma determinada role entrar em produção e isso ser associado a uma lista de identidades, eu tenho um ciclo de vida disso. E eu tenho processos que são, na verdade, best practices de mercado para que isso aconteça. E aqui um tipo de um processo como best practice dessa jornada de efetivar uma role em produção. Então, tem todos os conceitos de impacto, de análise, quem que é dono, quem que é owner, quem que aprova, quem que não aprova, a questão da nomenclatura em si, para trazer um pouco aqui de uma nomenclatura mais de negócio, não uma nomenclatura técnica, né? Isso é um grande desafio também, que a gente vai detalhar na apresentação aqui junto com o Benedito. E Importante, o quê? O mundo está mudando. A gente tá posicionando isso no mercado, que esses pilares, apesar de serem pilares importantes, sem eles nada acontece, são pilares que estão se transformando, né? IGA, IAN, parte de gestão de consentimento, a parte de PAN, eles estão dando um reshape em si da forma que eles trabalham, não só olhando o produto, mas a interoperabilidade deles, e aí a gente fala muito de protocolo, não só mais uma visão de identidade centralizada, mas de identidade descentralizada, a visão de autorização e política, principalmente para resolver as questões de AI, ou mesmo a questão de privilégio verificado, né, que é o just in time. Então, são novos pilares que o mercado está adotando para resolver os problemas de um novo mundo que a gente criou. E esses pilares não dá para resolver, não dá para começar a falar deles, né, desse paradigma aí, desse shift de paradigma, olhando só para os pilares antigos. A gente precisa olhar para os pilares novos e precisa começar a dar a devida importância para a parte de autorização. Então, a gente vem aí no mercado, a gente posicionando como um serviço que a gente está oferecendo no mercado, a gente chama, o próprio Gartner coloca esse label de AMP, né, que é Authorization Management Platform, que é exatamente a forma de criar essa plataforma, não só olhando para produto em si, mas olhando para a plataforma, casos de uso, problema para resolver, higienização do que existe e até mesmo uma abstração da autorização num outro formato, não só de role, mas olhando para atributo e olhando para policy. E aí a gente fala um pouquinho de ABAC e PBAC. E aí é a oferta dos nossos serviços, né? A gente tem feito isso no mercado de uma forma bem bacana, e de alguma forma até orientando os nossos clientes a como seguir esse caminho. De verdade, AI, não dá para pensar em AI, forma de proteção, guardrail, sem essa pegada, sem pensar na parte de autorização. E uma coisa bacana que a gente conseguiu fazer com a Nexus aqui, que a gente está ofertando no mercado, com custo que a gente chama acessível, a gente conseguir fazer um health check para o mercado e mostrar essa nova forma de gestão de roles, grupos e entitlement. E aí eu termino minha apresentação, passo a bola para o Benedite. Quiserem me contactar aqui no LinkedIn e no e-mail, eu adoro falar com todos aqui. Obrigado, turma. Bom dia. Benedite, thank you. Your turn.
E aí, nesse formulário, ele fala que eu preciso de um código de aprovação de MDF, só que
O Isa, tá com voz aqui, Isa. O Benedite, your turn.
Yeah, yes, perfect. Thank you for the introduction and for your insights. Then I will take over the screen. So first of all, because I think not everyone knows my company, and I think not everyone knows my company, Nexus, and therefore I want to share a few slides first regarding my company, what we are doing, and where we can help you. So I hope everyone can see my screen now. I think Nexus is kind of a small company in Germany. So we have around about 65 employees at the moment, but we have 16 years of experience in identity and access management, so quite a long time now. And we have 2 locations in Germany. I think that it's not very interesting for you in the south and in the north of Germany. And basically, what's very interesting is, and why we are also here in that webinar today, is because of our product, which is called the Nexus platform. I will come in my next slide more into detail what our product is about. And maybe to finish here that overview, we have a few sales and integration partners all over the world, also in Brasilia. So we are very glad to have such good partners all over the world, so that a lot of companies and people can gain profit from our software. Basically, our platform is about creating identity, visibility, and intelligence for the business. So that's also what we state here is our ambition. And maybe to come more into detail, I want to show you, kind of a quick overview about our platform. So I think in the slides before that were shown here in that webinar, the focus was all about role modeling, role life cycle, and that's exactly where we, Nexus, and our product, we see as the leading software in the world. So that's also where we come from and where our strengths are. So apart from that, you see here, we also have, we have addressed governance, risk, and compliance. That are parts we will not directly cover in that meeting today, but just to have a quick overall view, that's why it is stated here. For you, it's important to know Nexus is very good in identity and access analytics, in role mining, in lifecycle processes, and in configuring in configuring them without a lot of effort in programming and this kind of stuff. So that's as here important for an overview. Maybe also good to know is Nexus is the identity, visibility, and intelligence platform, as we call it, and we have a lot of out-of-the-box integrations. So I think before it was explained, there are groups, for example, Active Directory, Entra, and so on. So many applications possible, and these kind of groups we want to bundle in that business roles. And the most common integration is that you have a common IGA solution, and Nexus is then on top of that solution. So we get all the information for the relevant data. So organizational structure, so the departments, the identities, accounts, groups, all that stuff needs to be imported. And we have out-of-the-box integrations there. And then in Nexus, you can start your analysis, your role mining, your lifecycle management, this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's from my company. I'm Benedict. I'm working around about 7 years for Nexus. I'm senior consultant and also team lead. Team lead in our professional services. And yeah, I'm glad to show you now a little bit more about our product and how we can support exactly creating new roles, life cycle of roles, and yeah, I hope you enjoy my little live demonstration. So I will switch to the tool itself. now. That's Nexus. So the software is called the same or is the same name like the company. And here the software has, in addition, here the version number 4. So this is Nexus 4, which you can see here now. And as I told before, I want to show you now a little bit about how we can support in analyzing data, how you can create roles in Nexus, and how you can do the life cycle management of these roles in Nexus. So to start my presentation, I have a visualization brought with me, so you can see that visualization here. We call it the identity grid. So that's our name for it. And the identity grid is basically a visualization of employees and which entitlements they have assigned. For better understanding, you can see here now, we are in a certain department. The department is called Global Services. And this department has 23 employees. And the identity grid now shows us exactly these 23 employees. And here in that columns, you can see all the entitlements, all the groups that these 23 employees have assigned. So that's the visualization. And you can see here, such a gray box means, yes, the employee has that entitlement, that group assigned. That's basically our situation here right now. And looking at analysis, understand my data, and also as a, let's say, as a preparation for making business roles, I want to understand my data. So what I can see here now is that the software automatically tries to sort the data as logical as it might be from algorithm point of view. So the software tries to sort assignments together that everyone has. So I have marked it here. So you see here there are a lot of gray cells. So this means every employee of that department has this assignment and sorts it together. And apart from that, or additionally to that, it tries to make clusters next to it. So you see, for example, here is such a cluster, or here you have two kind of clusters, and here also. And then after having such assignments everyone has next to it cluster, we also have on the edges here visualized things that only one person has in the department, and also we have here some single cells. So and this is quite of a big effort that you directly have some smart visualization. Of course, now you could start discussing, why these kind of people have this entitlement and so on. You can also add additional information here in that visualization. As it was also shown in the previous slide before, that you have often such a top-down approach where you start with basic birthright roles, then you go to location, to the department, to the function, and so on. So basically what you will do is that you analyze these kind of data, these kind of attributes, and see, okay, can you see that there is, a relation between the clusters that you can see and the data. So for example, I can here add now in my visualization attributes for employees. So we have here in our prepared data set, for example, we have an attribute called function. And we have also an attribute that's called location. So these are two attributes which I think they might be relevant because certain people have assignments or not. Of course, I could also test a little bit and search, okay, which attribute is really relevant. But here for a demonstration, I want to show that to you with these two attributes. And you see, when I add them to the identity grid, to my visualization, I get a little bit more insights. So for example, here in that column, I see the function of employees here in that department. And I see, okay, here are a lot of people that have the function service consultants. I have 2 service controller. I have 1 person with the function head of global services. And last function here in the department, I have portfolio managers. And only looking at that, I can try to explain a little bit more in that picture. So for example, I can see, okay, this cluster here, only the portfolio managers have exclusively. So which directly gives me a really big hint, yes, build a business role for that. I would be able here directly to create a business role here while marking that cluster and say, yeah, create a business role here. That would be directly possible here. And apart from that, of course, I see here, this is here a cluster only the service consultants have exclusively. And apart from that, I have here some assignments the service controllers have exclusively. And what was maybe a little bit, where I said, okay, that might be wrong, or what happened maybe there is because I have 1 person with a lot of exclusive assignments in that department, and I see, okay, yeah, it's the head of global services, so it's a departmental head here. So you see, I can gain directly a little bit information here in my picture by adding attributes. And I could say, okay, yes, the data looks quite good for a business role mining. So for creating such business roles, of course, I fear such white cells or such outliers, we call them, which might be wrong, which can be cleaned up. But we want now to focus on business role mining. As I told before, you can create here manually business roles, which is which can be done. But what is more the idea here is that you get a first insight here. How is the data? Which attributes are relevant? And then start with that top-down approach that was previously shown with basic roles, location roles, department roles, and function roles. I want now to show you how you can model these kind of things. So, for example, I delete here my filters again, because to model this kind of top-down approach, I cannot only look into one department, because it may be not enough. That's maybe not enough. I need to have an overall look. And I want, as the picture has shown before, to have first very generic assignments, like that basic roles, is an employee internal, is he external, and then step by step become more specific, like for location, for department, for function. So that's always getting from the generic to specific. And here in Nexus, we have the possibility to create dynamic business roles. So that's how we call or how we say you can create such role candidates, how you can mine roles. So to mine roles, you need a steering attribute. So in my example before, I looked at the function, I looked at the location, this kind of stuff. And if I would identify, okay, these attributes are relevant for the assignments, they are, so to say, steering attributes. So that's the idea here. In the first step, when you create these basic roles, as I told before, it's very generic. Often you start here with employee type. And employee type here is, as you see, has 4 values in my demo data set: external, internal, and trainee. And you also see how many, how often these values are set in the data set. And the software would now try to generate business roles for that. And it works like that. You have here a threshold, and that threshold would basically mean, when we keep with the trainee example here, we have 38 trainees, and the software would now try to generate a business role trainee and would include all the 38 employees as members of the roles, and the composition of the role would be that the software looks at what have these 38 persons in common for 80%, and then the software would suggest to generate a role and include that kind of assignments. I already have created a little bit of roles. That's why I think the software would not suggest me here more or one candidate only from out of 4. I can also switch here from coverage mode all entitlements. Then I would get here more suggestions, and you see here, okay, I get a suggestion for external, and I would see, okay, here the software would recommend me to include 2 groups, 2 entitlements. They are called external remote, external restricted, because 1,832 employees have this value assigned. So that's more than 80%, and that's why the software would recommend it. I can also adjust here this percentage value. Often you are here in between 80 and 90%, because it's always a trade-off between least privilege principle and how I can bundle better. So that's always the trade-off you have, and that's why you normally are in a threshold value range between 80 and 90%. So that is what you can do in our software. And of course, you can understand, you can repeat it now. Now I have shown you the first layer, basic rights with the employee type. In a second step. You could do it for a location, you could do it for departments, you could do it for functions. Always step by step with a top-down approach. And with this setting, only uncovered entitlements, the software would only suggest me new roles with assignments that are not covered from roles from previous steps. So that is what you can do here. And if we come back now to our previous department, because we have done already such role modeling step by step, which I have explained to you. You can see if I mark everything now, you see every color is also displayed here in the identity grid. That would be the situation here. So for example, here the blue ones are the portfolio managers, the yellow ones are the service consultants, the orange ones, the service controller, and you see the big block here consists of an internal role and a department role. And this is quite of a good result, of course, in our demonstration environment, where you can gain a lot and see, okay, only a little bit is left, which can be handled then or cleaned up then in another step. So this is initial role creation. Of course, this is statistic. This is the first step. You see here, we called it also only role candidates. Also, it was shown in a previous deck slide. If you create these kind of roles, you have to ensure this is correct. So you can discuss this with the business, with the department. Is this really okay that we build that role? This kind of stuff. And you can also very good use the identity grid for that. You see, this is kind of a good foundation for a discussion to make these role candidates more transparent. And after you have done this, you have to set them productive. We do this with a role approval process. I think also some kind of example was shown there before. And for example, here, you could say here use start approval workflow and use initial approval of role candidates. And then a workflow is started and the task is created where the role owner that was set has to check, okay, should this role really be active? So for example here, this is a role Kunz Michael is the owner of. You see here, I am also logged in here as Michael Kunz. Maybe here to show you, this is the approval process we are currently using. So this can be configured, implemented as you want it. So here in that case, it's often, or it's kind of a best practice that is shown that you have in a first step the role owner approval and in the second step the data owner approval. And if everyone agrees, the certification is approved, and this would mean role is productive. You see here, this is a task now. And I can also show you now the business view because the business would have such a view like here within my task. So the business would see, okay, I have now here one business role to review. I can click here, yes, I want to review it. And then I would see all the relevant attributes. Of course, I can configure here everything, which attributes I want to see and so on. And I can also see here the content. So you see this role would now consist of 6 entitlements, and I can click here, approve, and would be able then to finish the task. So, and if also the second step would be done, this role would become active. So this were the first steps: data analysis, see how the data is structured, understand which attributes are helpful, creating role candidates, visualize these role candidates within the identity grid, make discussions, make an initial role approval. So this is, yeah, these were the first steps. And as you saw, it's very cool that you have such visualizations, that you can gain such insights, which attributes are relevant, that you can create directly these kind of roles with that algorithm, or also can have it in the identity grid with the visualization. So once these roles are, of course, active, they can change. So we have here a center called role management, where here I would be able to see my roles. So you see here, I have an overview of my roles. I can select one and I can say, yeah, I want to edit it. Change requests can only be created for active roles. So that's a good hint. You see they have a different status here. I only can edit active ones. The other ones I'm not able to. Here you see that internal role is active. I want to edit it. Then you would see we have created a different window. Of course, this is adjustable, configurable like you want. You can define which attributes are mandatory. You can also define some basically validations. And here it would be, yeah, the owner would be able to change here something, and also to add or remove here entitlements. And after that, of course, a certain workflow is started that we have defined. So this is possible here, and yeah, so this is changing, let's say if you need it. And then you have changing, or then you have your yearly recertification process. That's also something additional. So that you can create a recertification process. For example, here in my task, I think there are a lot of tasks for that employee, but I can show you here in the workflow center. For example, here I have a business role recertification in place. That's kind of similar to the initial role approval, and that can be started to a certain timestamp during the year, and that would start tasks for every roles you have in scope. You can define that scope too, and this would create then tasks again very similar to that initial role approval. So this was changing, and of course then last step, I think you saw the button before too, is that if a role is not needed anymore or stuff like that, you can also say here deactivate. So this is kind of a service that you can do here. I think here for newly requested roles, that was not done perfectly here in the demonstration. No action is available. I can also show it here. in that point of view, you could say here, for example, here, delete that business role. And yeah, then it's not needed anymore. And then this is maybe the last step of that life cycle. Of course, roles can be reactivated again, but that's basically it for the moment. So that was basically I wanted to show to you. So you see, I have a lot of options here, a lot of possibilities. I saw a lot of menu points here. I hope this has not confused you. I have also here in a separate window, it's here, such an overview how maybe the business would see it. Of course, they would not have all the menu points and stuff like that. So this can be configured like you want it based on the authorization concept. And basically here is an overview page. Here you can create new roles. For example, this is a manual new role creation. Here you would have my roles. Here you would see your tasks, and here you could search, for example, for certain roles, so that you understand that you can have views for every stakeholder you have. And in my view here, I was a high privileged user, which has a lot of authorizations. So I can have a look into identity grid. I can change everything. I can delete. I can recreate and all that stuff. A normal user maybe only has here this kind of pages, can only click certain buttons, and behind these certain buttons, workflows are in place so that everything has the right handling in the right order. Okay, so that was my overview I wanted to give to you. And yes, so I want to give back.
Thank you. Nice. Thank you, Benedito. We call it Benedito. Benedito in Portuguese.
Sure.
Thank you, Benedito, to join with us, to come, to present. I open for questions, okay? And Josimar have asked one question, very good question, by the way. I will translate to you. Which criteria you consider to modeling and approve the business roles to guarantee consistency, tracking, and segregation of duties? Which
yes,
criteria?
So segregation of duty, maybe I think this question has two parts: segregation of duty, and let's say that you don't have overlaps or within the roles or stuff like that. So regarding segregation of duty, I can tell that we have segregation of duty in place. You can have it a preventive check and you can have a detective check. So I don't know if it was already here. Yeah, I think here such a button is in place. So this is a window where you can create a new role, and here would be a button that checks for SOD, and the confirm button would prompt to check your SOD. So you can configure it directly in the creation so that there is no way around. And you can also configure it. Is it strictly forbidden? Is an allow listing possible? If yes, you can configure an allow listing workflow. So again, who should approve that and this stuff, so that you can have preventive checks. And for the detective check, you have here, we call them policies. So in Nexus wording, such a SoD, a segregation of duty, is called a policy. You see here, this is our policy center. And here we have kind of a few policies here. So, and while clicking these buttons or clicking the confirm, the software would check if these policies are not okay or are okay. So that's basically it. And you would be also able to here to execute that policies detective or afterwards or in a scheduled way. So that's possible here. You can also define directly such matrices in Nexus. So because often SOD is done with classes. So for example, here, this would be classes vendor maintenance, and you would say vendor maintenance cannot be with the class posting invoices and payments, and the software would check this policies here. This was question or the short answer regarding SOD. So in summary, yes, you can have preventive and detective checks. You can include them in your business role creation and changing. So that's within the workflows possible, and the checks refer to that policies then. By the way, you can also, if you have a third-party system, you can make a REST call to us and we give you back SOD check yes or no, and if yes, more details. So that's also possible. And regarding the other part of the question is how you can provide such optimizations. In Nexus, for example, you would have the possibility here to create overlap policies. I don't know if I think in my demo data set no overlap policies in place, but I could say, for example, here compare the business roles, and this here are thresholds, and the software would be able to compare how similar they are. And if a certain threshold of similarity is achieved, you get a result. So that is possible here. And apart from that, we have a possibility that's called a role optimization, which would give you recommendations what to change. But to be honest, these features, I tell you now, this is done in a more central way. So mostly you have a few people in your company that are handling that. And then you have the decentral part where people do their roles on their own. And I would say most of our customers handle such optimizations, such overlappings in a central way. Maybe in the future, if awareness and if the business is more aware of it, this could be done maybe also decentral, but as we know it, or as my experience is, that this is done centrally, and there you can use such overlap checks or such optimization algorithms.
Hi, Benedict. We have other two questions. One from Newton. Newton, thank you. Software should be integrated with the authoritative source for role mining?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correct. But I think the login
data to the source data.
The source
from
data.
Where? From IGA, from AG, from text file, from...
So the most common integration is that you have one IGA and you have then a connection from that. So for example, from SailPoint IIQ for one identity manager, for example, and you get basically all the data, all the information from that single source. We have, as I showed in my slide before, we have connectors here in place, and this is the most common way. And also looking at implementation effort and that stuff, also the easiest way, because you only need one interface, because that is that information is already in place, and yeah, you connect simply to IGA and basically you have everything you need. Of course, you can also make direct connects in Nexus. I can show you here. You can here in my default, I can say I want to create a CSV file connector, a database, a LDAP, a Active Directory. We have also direct connectors to Entra or to SAP, to ServiceNow. So that is also possible, but you can imagine that's also then, yeah, a new interface, a new connection that needs to be established. But this is also possible. And of course,
the inverse, another question, the inverse.
Okay.
Connect through Nexus via API to check any policy violation or
yes,
a new access delivered by IGA.
So we have a REST API documentation. I hope it's loading quite fast. Don't know if I can find. Of course, you can do that. So
don't need to
here,
implement now, okay, Benedict? We don't need to implement, just show.
yeah, yes. You're right. So you can do that. A few customers have the situation, they do the role mining in Nexus and do the SOD checks for the roles there, because you have to ensure that your roles don't have SOD conflicts. And then you have in SailPoint, in One Identity Manager, you have your shop where you can request assignments and so on. And that's the second point where you have to check from user point of view SOD. And then you can simply send us here such a call, which employee, which permission, and then we would send you a request back, yes or no.
Nice. Okay. I think that we finalize the questions here. Thank you, Benedict, to join us from Berlin, from Germany, from where?
Yeah, close to Munich. Maybe you know that city.
Yeah, we know the beers from Munich.
The Oktoberfest is often known.
Oktoberfest.
Yes, I'm not far from that. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. O turma,
Thank you for
brigadão, viu?
invitation.
Valeu nos acompanhar aí sempre, tá? E estamos à disposição de todos aqui. Nos contactem aí para esclarecer mais dúvidas, mas de fato eu acho que é uma mão na roda isso para o mercado brasileiro, tá? E o mercado precisa. Brigadão, estamos juntos e até a próxima. Thank you, Benedict.
Yep. Thank you all.